Hey everyone, it's Sevi. Welcome to my imaginary March 7th guide where we'll be covering her Hunt Forms kit and gameplay, Eidolons, Relic and Lightcone builds, team synergies, tips, and more to better understand her brand new combat style. And a quick note that the footage and testing here is from the Creator Experience server, so there may still be some changes in the final version update, but they should be very minor if ever. Now let's get started. March 7th's imaginary hunt form features a master mechanic that can adapt her towards two different builds and playstyles, a more conventional attack-crit route or the newer super break playstyle, while also having some support utilities for her master. For a free unit, March's flexibility and surprisingly strong potential is quite impressive, so let's first see how her kit makes this all possible. To start, March's skill designates another ally to be her Shifu or master, which also increases that unit's speed. This has no duration, so it can last throughout the entire battle. The master is an important role, firstly because they help March get stronger. Depending on her master's path, they provide additional effects to her basic attacks. If the master is erudition, destruction, or hunt, March's hits deal additional damage. While its damage scales on March's attack stat, the element will correspond to the master's element. For instance, since Yun Li is the master, March's enhanced basic attacks deal physical damage per hit as well. Meanwhile, if the master is nihility, harmony, preservation, or abundance, then March's attack deals 100% more or twice the toughness reduction. This is useful for faster breaking and it enables her strong super break playstyle. Her damage mainly comes from her enhanced basic attack, but in order to trigger it, March first needs to accumulate charge points. From her talent trace, whenever the master uses an attacker ultimate, or if March uses her regular basic attack, she gains 1 charge point each time, which you can track on her HUD. Once she reaches 7 charge points, March immediately advances her turn, during which she gains a damage increase, disables her skill, and most importantly, enhances her basic attack. Using her enhanced basic attack will consume 7 charge points. It deals 3 initial hits by default, but after the final hit, there's a 60% chance to deal 1 extra hit, which can trigger up to 3 times. While more hits clearly equals more raw damage, that also means more toughness damage dealt for faster breaking and stronger super break damage. Note that this enhanced basic attack does not recover SP, and it also regenerates 30 energy rather than the regular 20 energy of basic attacks. But since she practically only needs to use her skill once per match, March is a very SP positive unit as she'll only either use her enhanced or regular basic attacks on her turn. Alongside that, casting her ultimate deals imaginary damage to a single target, but more importantly, it makes her enhanced basic attack deal 2 extra initial hits, while also giving an additional 20% chance for her to deal extra hits. This can now allow her enhanced basic attack to deal up to 8 hits in total. An 80% chance helps her deal as many hits as possible rather than the default 60% chance, but as always, that's still subject to RNG, so have fun with that. In summary, March's damage and playstyle largely revolves around having her master help her gain charges faster to trigger her enhanced basic attack, and depending on her master's path, you can buff it to deal more raw damage or toughness damage, which are indicative if she's taking a more conventional attack-crit build or a break-focused playstyle. We'll discuss these different builds and teams as we continue on. Anyway, let's look at what her Ascension abilities add too. For her Ascension 2 or A2 ability, March 7th gets a 25% action advance at the start of battle. This largely helps ensure that she can assign her master as soon as possible, likely before their first turn. Now her A4 is an extremely valuable upgrade, as with it, March can now also reduce the toughness of the enemy if their weakness is the same as her master's element. That gives her a huge amount of added combat and breaking flexibility as she can adapt to the enemy's weaknesses alongside her master's element. This is useful whether she's on a crit or break build, but will, of course, be much more valuable on her super break playstyle, which requires you to create broken windows as effectively as possible to deal damage. Note that breaking the enemy this way still triggers an imaginary break, not the break of that master's element. And if the enemy is weak to both imaginary and the master's element, March still deals the same amount of toughness damage, so those weaknesses don't stack her toughness reduction. And with her A6, after using an enhanced basic attack, the master gets both 60% crit damage and 36% break effect bonuses for 2 turns. This gives her extra support utility, which is also flexible as she can help buff either crit or break focused units. With her technique, when her allies use their techniques, March gains 1 charge point at the start of the next battle, and this can be stacked up to 3 times. You don't have to use March's technique to gain those stacks, they'll be given automatically either way. Using her technique instead just gives her 30 energy at the start of the next battle to help set up her ultimate. For March's minor stat bonus traces, she gets attack, crit damage, and defense, though break effect instead of defense would have been really nice. If you're building her as a crit DPS, level up her enhanced basic attack first, as that's her main damage source, followed by her her skill, talent, and ultimate. However, if you're building her as a super break DPS, her damage multipliers become less necessary since super break damage scales mainly on toughness damage and break effect, which aren't affected by her trace levels anyway. At most, prioritize her skill trace since that increases the speed buff her master receives. All of March's Eidolons are free, though we can only unlock 3 upon her release, with the remaining 3 at a later time. Let's see what they add. With E1, March now also gets a 10% speed buff while her master is on the field, which can let her get charges faster and makes reaching speed targets easier. With E2, when the master uses a basic or skill attack, March immediately launches her own follow-up attack that's also similarly buffed depending on the master's path, and it generates 1 charge point. It's only limited to triggering once per March's turn, and if the initial target dies, then March still targets a random enemy. It doesn't make her a follow-up focused unit, and the damage multiplier isn't crazy, but this is a nice addition to her base kit as it equates to faster charge point generation, extra energy, raw damage, and toughness damage, and gives her some potential follow-up trigger synergies. E3 increases her skill and basic attack levels. E4 makes her regenerate 5 energy at the start of her turn for faster ultimate recharging, which results in potentially faster and more frequent buffed enhanced basic attacks. E5 increases her ultimate and talent levels, and lastly, E6 makes using her ultimate give her next enhanced basic attack a 50% crit damage buff, so that's simply more damage, though it won't be as impactful on a super break build. Now, when it comes to her Relic and Lightcone build, we can categorize her preferences between an attack crit or a super break build. Let's start with a conventional crit build. It's the usual attack, crit, and damage percent main and substats as displayed on screen. Her boots can switch to attack rather than speed, since her charge generation can be more reliant on her master to advance her turn, though that will depend on her team. Remember to factor in her E1 speed buff as well for your preferred speed target, but also that her turn frequency will vary due to her advance effect. Then for the relic sets, the main set you'd want is the Musketeer for giving all-around useful and unconditional bonuses. Other potential sets have particular requirements to fully maximize, so I'd still ultimately recommend Musketeer for universality. With planar ornaments, the most recommended is Rutilant Arena for its crit rate and basic attack bonus as long as you hit 70% crit rate. Izumo if paired with another hunt ally, followed by Glamoth if she hits 135 speed are the next alternatives. Then for her attack crit build light cones, let's summarize her best options. Cruising in the Stellar Sea is a very strong baseline free-to-play option. The copy and superimpositions are available in her to store, so you can guarantee it's S5. While you need the wearer to kill enemies to trigger the attack buff, at least many bosses have easy-to-kill summons which can help with that. You can easily rely on this rather than having to get S5 of other 4-star gacha options. Notable mentions are Swordplay as a competitive option as it can stack a really high damage bonus versus a single target, and only Silence remains especially to help improve your crit ratio, but it needs 2 or less enemies to trigger. And if you have limited 5-star light cones, namely Topazes, Ratios, or Zelas, those are of course also going to be strong in March, but due to her kit not being able to maximize their tailored passives, they aren't a big enough jump in terms of personal damage compared to Stellar Sea, so only use them if you had them in the first place and can steal them from their owners. Now let's go to her Super Break build. This time, you're looking for break effect and speed stats above all else. Since you can't get break effect on the body or sphere, you can still stick to crit, attack, or imaginary damage percent pieces. Those stats are less impactful on her overall damage since her main damage source is Super Break, but that's still added raw damage nonetheless. As for relics, the best option is pretty much going to be the 4-piece Iron Cavalry. 4-piece Thief is a less potent but still okay next choice, or a 2-piece break effect set plus break effect or speed set combo for flexibility. And it's either the Talia or Forge set for planar ornaments, which have close bonuses. With Talia, make sure March hits 145 speed for the max effect, and with the Forge, March needs to fight fire-weak enemies to trigger the break effect buff, which is feasible with her weakness adaptability and a fire teammate. Break-focused hunt light cones are still quite short in supply right now. There's always Boothill's light cone if you pulled it before and can steal it from him. Otherwise, you can go for Adversarial or River Flows in Spring for their speed bonuses. But you can also just stick to the previously discussed light cones for her crit build. Even if they don't buff break effect, there's still some portion of March's damage coming from her raw imaginary damage, so they'll still have some effect on her overall damage, albeit not as impactful as on a crit build. Moving on, let's talk about her teams and synergies. One universal criteria is having a master who can attack plus ultimate frequently, as that will drive her charge stack generation. Of course, her master should be the path that will fit either her crit or break playstyle, and picking the right element if ever you need to brute force against a particular enemy weakness will also be a factor. Since March is also a very SP positive unit, she can better enable teams that are quite SP hungry, whether it's because of another DPS or support. With new units being added who can fit such a criteria, March's master options and teams can continuously expand. March can have more teams to experiment with, but you can use these suggestions as a starting point. In a dual DPS team and crit March build with another erudition, hunt, or destruction ally, fast-acting and follow-up attack units are usually top candidates. Yun Li or Clara, who can counter when attacked by enemies, have relatively easy trigger conditions and are great pairings for March, Yun Li especially. Be careful of March interrupting Yun Li's perfect parry if her charge points reach 7 after Yun Li casts her ultimate and she advances her turn before Yun Li can parry. Using March in the Topaz Robin Aventurine team is also a great combo. Numby's follow-up attack still counts towards generating charge points for March, and with March's coordinated follow-up attacks from her E2, at least it gives her some synergy to help advance Numby as well. This can work vice versa with a Dr. Ratio March combo, putting two free and strong imaginary units together who can plow through imaginary weaknesses, though you'll just need other debuff applicators to maximize Dr. Ratio's effects. Equipping Topaz's 5-star light cone on March, which allows the user's follow-up to inflict a debuff, can also help with that. If you have E1 Jade, then she can also combo with March, since each single target attack can generate 3 stacks for Jade, making it a more viable team for MoC clears. Shui Yi can also be a potential choice for a master, as follow-up attacks are part of her core kit. Due to Shui Yi's hybrid scaling kit, she's actually someone who can fully benefit from March's A6 passive, which buffs both crit damage and break effect, 2 stats Shui Yi naturally appreciates. A very notable sustain is Gallagher, since he's a prime candidate to be March's master. I know I'd like him to be mine. Gallagher naturally wants a fast build, which allows him to act more frequently than most other sustains, and March's speed buff further helps with that. And with his basic ult basic combo, he can generate 3 consecutive charges in one go. You can make him way faster by using the multiplication light cone for the advance effect, or a quid pro quo build to help teammates generate energy faster. In a scenario where Gallagher's basic attack triggers March's follow-up attack and advances March immediately afterwards due to reaching 7 stacks, and Gallagher's ult is fully charged, you can opt not to use Gallagher's ultimate right away. Let March take her turn first to refresh her follow-up trigger so that when you use Gallagher's ult into basic attack, March will also trigger her follow-up attack again right away, thereby maximizing her follow-up attack and charge point generation. One other speed tuning tip in some cases is to make March a bit faster than the Master. This is so that if the Master's attack causes March to advance forward, then you get a lot of action value advanced, compared to if the Master advances March when her turn is already close anyway. But this is more applicable to teams where you have more control of your Master's attacks, like with Gallagher, unlike Masters with more RNG mechanics, like counter units. March can function as a hyper carry, though I'd recommend her super break hyper carry playstyle rather than a crit hyper carry playstyle due to the former being generally stronger and more accessible. If you're considering a crit hyper carry March, very few supports can be viable enough to provide fast charge generation for her. Again, having a Master Gallagher will come in very handy. Advanced forward allies are also valuable as they can advance both March and or the Master to further drive charge point generation. One such team is using Bronya to advance Gallagher, where you can build Bronya to move right after Gallagher. The idea is to advance Gallagher as much as possible so he can recharge his ult and generate charges faster. Since you have March and Gallagher as SP positive units, SP management is barely an issue. That leaves a flex slot for another support, and Robin's team advance forward will be ideal to further advance your entire team's turns and speed up charge generation. It's not going to beat out those more meta hypercarry teams, and it's not a general or beginner-friendly recommendation, but it's a possibly fun, unconventional option for those who have the appropriate units and gameplay knowledge. Meanwhile, for March's hypercarry super break team, which I generally recommend more, it'll be very similar to Firefly's hyper team. Harmony MC is required, Gallagher is the ideal sustain, and Ruan Mei will be your ideal flex buffer. Remember that Harmony MC and Gallagher can also contribute a lot of super break damage themselves. It's a strong team, and it helps that a break build is relatively easier to build than crit. If you didn't get Firefly or Bootil yet, March is a good intro to your break team. In the Firefly Harmony MC teams, March can only replace either the support or sustain slot. But losing your sustain isn't a generally good idea. You'll likely have or want Ruan Mei as your flex slot, and March isn't going to be an equally potent replacement for everything else Ruan Mei offers. But if you don't have Ruan Mei, want to allot her to a second team, want to try something different, or just don't care that that much about the most optimal team, March can take up her slot, albeit to a less potent degree. It's still workable, and I still can manage good runtimes in MoC at least. Designating either Gallagher or Firefly as the master also have their own pros and cons. Similar principles apply if you want to slot March and Boothill together. I still prefer Boothill's hyper carry templates, but replacing a dedicated support slot with March is something you can try and it can still be functional enough. Of course, these recommendations are not definitive or exhaustive, so feel free to try your own teams and see what others suggest. Finally, let's discuss March's auto-battle behavior. The most important aspect is how she targets the master. In a dual DPS team with a fellow Erudition, Destruction, or Hunt ally, March consistently targets the ally of that path, so unless you plan to confuse her with more than one of them, you'll know what to expect. However, on a hypercarry team with allies only of the other paths, that's where it gets tricky. From what I've tested, it seems that March will target her teammate who has the highest speed stat at the start of battle. I was able to verify this by reducing their speed stats and seeing March change her skill target to the fastest unit. As you can imagine, that's not necessarily always ideal. For example, Gallagher may just have one speed less than another support, but his ult combo still makes him a more suitable candidate than, say, Harmony MC. So basically, if you want to optimize her hypercarry auto battle, be wary of her ally's speed stats. This might change in the future, but for now, I'm not sure what other logic they could implement. And for the rest of her abilities, March just uses her ult as soon as it's ready and will just use basic attacks for the rest of the fight after assigning a master. And that's it for this guide on our Best Girl's new form. Let me know if you'll be building Hunt March 7th and who you plan on teaming her up with. If this video helped you out, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all soon. Take care!